Today, Belfast, Northern Ireland looks much like any other city in the United Kingdom. Teens hang out with their friends downtown. Visitors snap photos and tour the city streets. But in many ways, this is a region stuck in time, desperately struggling to leave behind a violent past. Not long ago, Belfast was an urban battlefield. News footage of the time shows chaos and seemingly endless violence. Not unlike the coverage of today's War on Terror.
One or more of the mortars landed in Horse Guards Parade after being launched from the terrorist van.
But today in Northern Ireland, the fighting is over. And thousands once imprisoned as terrorists must come to terms with what they did.
They were going out with guns to shoot people. They were blowing places up. There are terrible, terrible tragedies of our conflict, and these people, they're carrying that.
Where did our armed struggle take us? You know, other than the people who were killed.
I knew when I was involved in what I was involved in that it was wrong.
There are increasing signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. There is also very high levels of use of antidepressants and alcohol.
These men and women are a reminder that all wars end eventually, and even terrorists get old.
We spotted a man walking up the Ormer Road, and knowing where he was walking and the time of night it was, he was likely to be a Catholic. So I got out of the car and ran up close to him and shot him in the head at close range. As soon as I done it, I just looked straight up and I just felt the presence of God looking down on me, and I knew I had stepped over a line.
During the brutal 30-year war known here as the Troubles, thousands on both sides of the conflict stepped over that line. Catholic nationalists opposed to British rule and Protestants loyal to the Crown attacked and killed one another in daily violence. The combatants were young, mostly poor, and ready to die for what they saw as the righteousness of their cause.
What is it like to join the IRA? What happens in that process?
They warn you. You sure you want to join? You have two things that you're going to face, is the graveyard or the prison cell.
And for many, that's exactly what happened. An estimated 30,000 people were arrested and imprisoned for crimes during the Troubles. In some areas of Belfast, up to 10% of the local population was locked up. Many were handed life sentences. Then, in 1998, everything changed.
An historic agreement for peace in Northern Ireland has been reached within the past few minutes.
News reports announced the Good Friday Agreement. The war in Northern Ireland ended. Everyone imprisoned for their role in the conflict was set free. And all these fighters who had chosen a life with no future suddenly had one.
A lot of prisoners got out and they were just lost. They were lost. Their whole focus was on the fight for freedom and on whatever they had to do in their fight for that struggle. Then the ceasefire's on, the peace is on, and they're left. Where do they go? Where do they turn to?
Joe Docherty is a former member of the IRA who spent 22 years in prison before being released under the peace agreement.
Looking at all these now, as an older person, now that the conflict has ended, how does it feel to see all of these names here and all of these
it brings back
very young people?
Memories, fond memories, because you knew them when they were kids. But it's sad too, because they all fought and died for a united Ireland, and we haven't achieved it yet.
Living long enough to see peace, but not victory, has many former combatants questioning their roles in a war that has become more complicated with time.
We got over 500 of our own volunteers killed. And have we achieved anything? Have we went any further?
Those are questions Docherty often asks himself when he passes the Belfast house where he shot a British soldier in the head.
And I pass that site sometimes, and it's a very personal moment for me because you had a wife, you had a family, and I'm glad that I can sit here and say that. I'm sorry for the families in England whose sons were killed in this area.
At what point did you start to feel personally sorry for the things that you had done?
It was only after my son had died that I was able to look at what I had done and the heartache and misery that I had caused.
Noel Large spent 16 years in prison for murders he carried out as a loyalist gunman. He says God punished him by taking away his firstborn son.
The man that I killed was shot down with a .357 Magnum, and I was given 357 years. And my son was born on the 3rd, died in the 5th, and was cremated on the 7th.
To Large, the child's death was the price he had to pay for taking justice into his own hands and taking it too far.
People feared you because they knew what you were capable of. And I gloried in that, you know, I don't mind admitting that. But I knew also that it was wrong.
These men came through a conflict, you know, at maybe 15, 16, 17 years old, and war is nasty and it's cruel, and people have to do nasty and cruel things.
Breege Brownlee joined the IRA as a teenager and soon became part of their firebombing campaign in Belfast.
There was a lot of women around this area involved in their public movements.
Though claiming to strike only economic targets, news reports from the time show the vast destruction and bloodshed the IRA's bombs actually caused. At 18 years of age, Brownlee was caught with a bomb and sentenced to 8 years in prison.
I would say the vast majority of people who have been through our prison system would never have been to prison in their lives, except for the struggle that took place here.
Brownlee says this was the case with her husband Paul, who served 22 years in prison for shooting a police officer. When he got out, the war was over, and Paul was never the same.
While he would love me, would love the kids, love the home and all the rest of it, the alcohol took over. And it ended up bringing violence into our living room.
One Christmas, Paul attacked Breege in a drunken rage. He lit her car on fire and was jailed again for domestic abuse. Brownlee calls her husband one of the war's walking wounded.
They were talking about 60-odd% who have mental health and alcohol problems, you know, 2.5 times higher than the standard population.
Pete Sherlow is a professor at Queen's University Belfast. He studies former militants and their problems, like unemployment, alcoholism, and depression. He says Northern Ireland has some of the world's highest levels of antidepressant drug use.
Half of those people are taking antidepressants because of post-traumatic stresses that were caused by the conflict.
How many pints can you do on a typical?
I don't know. So you're boasting to say I don't know. Now, there's people I know would drink 40 pints.
40.
40. Most of them would drink 25. I'll see you later.
Pat Livingston spent 17 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit. He keeps his own drinking in check, but he's seen a number of friends and former comrades drink themselves to death after being released.
Well, there's one died there, isn't a good friend of mine, you know. But he was out every morning, you know. He'd been out every single morning drinking, you know. That's it there. The stolen child.
But what torments Livingston more than anything is the violent death of his little sister, Julie. The 14-year-old was shot by the British Army while he was locked up.
That's a spot where she was killed.
So tell me what happened.
She was over that shop. Armoured car come up there and you know those wee slats at the side of the armoured car that fired a plastic bullet out on the side of the head. Sound harmless, don't they? Plastic bullets. Try getting hit up the head one of 100 men an hour.
So they would fire these into crowds for crowd control?
They're supposed to fire on the ground, hit you in the legs, but they don't. Like they hit you in the chest and hit you in the head and hit you everywhere.
Livingston was asleep in his prison cell when guards delivered the news.
He opened the door at 2 o'clock in the morning. And he says, have your sister called Julia? And he says, no. He said, you haven't? He said, I haven't got a sister called Julia. I mean, if a sister called Julia, he said, that's fucking close enough. He says, she's dead. Slammed the door.
They talk about like counseling and stuff. Have you ever thought about doing any of that? No.
I don't think I needed that. I think a person that's done it probably needs counselling a lot more than I do.
How hard is it for a man to walk through this door for the first time and sit down with you and talk?
Men in general, we are socialised to believe that we take care of our own problems.
Joe Barnes is a former Republican combatant who became a counsellor after spending 8 years behind bars. He works closely with Northern Ireland's ex-prisoner population.
Generally speaking, people who have suffered trauma and the effects of trauma, it doesn't necessarily decrease with age. In many cases, it actually gets worse with age.
What about the stuff that you hear now about
with the guys that are getting a bit older, like the post-traumatic stress?
I don't know. You're bound to have it, what you went through, you know what I mean? Maybe we all haven't, just don't notice.
Was it worth it? Everything that you had to do, everything that you had to give up?
It was worth it for the people that I met and the people I think, but was it worth it because we're still under English rule? Probably not. I still think there will be a war again, if Ireland's not freed within a certain thing.
Livingston is not alone. The Troubles ended 17 years ago, but deep divisions persist between Republican and Loyalist communities. To this day, towering 30-foot-high walls cut across Belfast, physically separating Catholic and Protestant neighbourhoods.
Do you feel unsafe here?
Of course, but they're not going to make me move. They'll have to kill me before they get me out of this country.
In most settings, this small protest would seem harmless. A few dozen Protestants lobbying to route their annual parade up a residential street in North Belfast.
You feel you're being prejudiced against?
Of course we're being prejudiced against. We're the majority people in this country and we've no say. Brilliant.
Do you feel like that's changed?
No.
Since peace came along?
No, there's no such thing as peace. No. There's no such thing as peace here.
Police are out in full force for this demonstration. They patrol the nearby Catholic neighborhood in armored trucks, looking for would-be attackers. This site has been targeted several times in past months.
So you believe the society is ready to go back to war?
Well, it takes one incident, and this place could go nuts. It's always been like that since the Protestant people have been in Ireland. They just don't want us here, they hate us. Simple as.
Is there a part of you that kind of wants it to kick off a little bit again?
You see, that's a very tough question because the history of the Troubles here has proved that the only time you get listened to is by using violence.
There are no tidy endings in Northern Ireland, and a new generation of young people with few job prospects and a romanticized view of their parents' or grandparents' war may be the biggest threat to peace. In the last year, there have been more than 200 terror-related arrests in Northern Ireland.
You're not born a bigot, and you're not born to hate people.
But some ex-combatants have made it their mission to break through the sectarian divide that persists among Belfast youth. Joe Docherty and Noel Large, once bitter enemies, now work together to promote reconciliation.
Very, very few Catholics were in the leadership. A lot of Catholics were the ones who rebelled.
Tonight, Docherty is meeting with a group of young kids from a Loyalist community. He's guiding them through a Republican museum to show them the conflict through the other side's eyes.
If you're asking me how we achieved anything, at least we're talking. At least we have to learn that 3,000 odd people died. You know, and that's everybody. You can't say it was just IRA victims. It was everybody's victim, and it's all passed on to these young lads here.
Try and make it clear to them that there's nothing wrong with being a Loyalist or a Republican, and rather than see it as a weapon to use against each other, see it as something that should be celebrated.
For Docherty and Large, dissuading young people from violence is both community service and personal redemption.
I had to move beyond what I had done and get on with living the rest of my life in the most positive way I can. Try and create conditions where young people don't have to make the choices that I made.
There's me. Remember switching me last week?
We're still in conflict. The violence might not be there, the conflict itself, but the fear is there, and there's a mistrust in each side. And that's what's important about Noel's work and my work. We're trying to build the bridges between communities, enough to build up the trust.